bitter life lesson you learned from your longest relationship? Story 1. We were together for almost a decade. I thought we had the kind of relationship that could survive anything, until I realized I was the only one fighting. I always believed love meant compromise, that it was about meeting in the middle. What I didn't see was that I was the only one doing the bending, while he stood firm, expecting me to mold myself around him. It started small. He didn't like my friends, so I saw them less. He thought my hobbies were childish, so I stopped. He convinced me my job wasn't stable enough, so I switched careers. By the time he left, I didn't recognize myself. He walked away with no regrets, no guilt, and no hesitation. And me? I had nothing left of the person I used to be. The bitter lesson? Love should never cost you your identity. If you have to erase yourself to make someone else happy, you're in the wrong relationship. Story 2. I learned that some people stay with you out of convenience, not love. For years, I thought we were solid. We shared a life, a home, and plans for the future. Then one day, he just left. No real explanation. Just, I don't feel the same anymore. What hurt most wasn't the breakup itself, but realizing he had emotionally checked out long before he physically left. Looking back, the signs were all there. He stopped making an effort, conversations became dull, intimacy felt forced. But I convinced myself it was just a phase. Turns out, he had been waiting for a better option to come along. And when she did, he was gone in an instant, as if our years together meant nothing. Lesson learned? If someone treats you like an option, don't make them your priority. Story 3. Love doesn't heal people. I learned that the hard way. I fell for someone who was deeply broken. At first, I thought my love could fix him. That if I just showed enough patience, enough understanding, enough forgiveness, he would become the man I knew he could be. I excused his coldness, his distance, even his anger because I told myself he was just going through things. What I didn't see was that while I was trying to save him, I was drowning myself. He drained me, emotionally, mentally, and even physically, but he never changed. The hardest pill to swallow? Love isn't enough to change someone who doesn't want to change. No matter how much you give, some people will take it all and still walk away empty. Story 4. I thought we were building a future together. Turns out I was just a placeholder. We were together for 6 years, talked about marriage, kids, growing old together. Then, out of nowhere, he broke things off, said he wasn't ready for that kind of commitment. It was devastating, but I respected his honesty. 3 months later, he was engaged to someone else. I felt like my entire relationship had been a lie. He was ready, just not with me. I had been the warm-up, the practice run, the one he figured things out with before finding the one he actually wanted. The lesson? Some people won't settle down until they meet the right person. And sometimes, you're just the person they date before that happens. Story 5. Not everyone who says they love you actually respects you. We were together for 8 years. Through thick and thin, I stood by his side. Through job losses, family drama, even times when he wasn't his best self. I thought that was what love was. Then I found out he had been cheating for half of our relationship. And not just once, multiple times. With different people. The worst part? When I confronted him, he didn't even try to deny it. He just shrugged and said, "I still love you though," as if love and respect were separate things. That's when I learned, love without respect is meaningless. If they truly love you, they won't betray you. And if they betray you, they never really loved you in the first place. Story 6. I learned that love isn't about who's willing to fight the hardest. I spent 7 years in a relationship where I was always the one making the effort. If there was an argument, I apologized first. If there was distance, I closed the gap. If things felt like they were falling apart, I picked up the pieces. I convinced myself that if I just tried harder, loved deeper, sacrificed more, we'd eventually be okay. But love shouldn't feel like a constant battle where only one person is fighting. It took me years to realize that a relationship shouldn't be a test of endurance. Love should be mutual, effortless, in the sense that both people want to be there, want to make things work, and want to choose each other every day. The bitter lesson? You can't force someone to care the way you do. And if you're the only one holding everything together, it's already broken. Story 7. I used to think that love and trust were the same thing. That if someone loved you, they would never lie to you. That was before I spent 9 years with a man who lied so easily, it became second nature to him. At first, it was little things, white lies. I forgot to text back, or I was working late. But then, I started catching him in bigger ones. Money he was secretly spending, plans he was making without me, entire conversations with other women that he swore meant nothing. Every time he would look me in the eye and promise it was the last time. And every time I believed him. By the time I found out about the other woman, the real other woman, the one he had been seeing behind my back for years, I felt like a complete fool. Not because he had cheated, but because I had spent almost a decade convincing myself that love meant blind trust. The lesson? Love without honesty is just manipulation. Someone who truly loves you won't make you question reality. Story 8. I learned that staying for the sake of history is just a slow way to break your own heart. We were high school sweethearts. Everyone said we were the perfect couple. We grew up together, went through every milestone together, built a life that looked good from the outside. But somewhere along the way, we stopped being in love and started just existing, side by side. We didn't fight. We didn't have explosive arguments, but we also didn't feel anything. Conversations became small talk. Affection felt forced. We became strangers living in the same house, clinging to memories instead of making new ones. I stayed because I was scared to let go of something that had been part of my life for so long. I told myself that maybe things would get better, that love ebbs and flows, that relationships go through rough patches. But the truth is, when something dies, no amount of waiting will bring it back. Walking away was painful, but staying would have been worse. I learned that just because something lasted a long time doesn't mean it was meant to last forever. Story 9. I learned that being the perfect partner won't make someone love you the way you deserve. For 10 years, I bent over backward to be the woman he wanted. I cooked, I cleaned, I supported his dreams, I laughed at jokes that weren't funny, I forgave things I shouldn't have forgiven. I swallowed my own needs because I thought love meant putting the other person first. But no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. He always found something to complain about. Something I did wrong, something I should have done, something I used to do but didn't. And then one day he left, just like that. Found someone new within a month and told me she just understands him better. That was the moment I realized love isn't something you can earn by being perfect. The right person will love you for who you are, not for how much of yourself you sacrifice for them. Story 10. The biggest lesson I learned? Never let someone convince you that your needs are too much. I spent 8 years in a relationship where every time I expressed my feelings, I was met with, "Why do you always have to make things difficult?" Or, "You're so emotional." Anytime I was upset, he told me I was being dramatic. Anytime I asked for more effort, he made me feel like I was needy. Eventually, I stopped asking. I stopped bringing up my feelings, stopped expecting anything, stopped believing I deserved more. I told myself I was just low maintenance, that I was being a good partner by not nagging, not pushing, not complaining. But deep down, I was miserable. It wasn't until I finally left that I realized love isn't supposed to make you feel small. The right person won't make you apologize for having feelings. They won't make you feel like loving them is a burden. If someone makes you feel like you're asking for too much, they're probably giving too little. Story 11. I learned that some people don't actually want love. They just want control. I was with him for almost 8 years. At first, he was charming, funny, and protective in a way that made me feel safe. But over time, that protection turned into possession. It started subtle. He didn't like my friends, so he found ways to push them out of my life. He didn't like me dressing a certain way, so I changed my wardrobe. Then he started making comments about my job, my family, my interests, anything that gave me a sense of independence. By the time I realized what was happening, I was isolated, constantly walking on eggshells, always trying to be good enough to avoid his criticism. The scariest part? I thought I deserved it. He convinced me that his behavior was love, that he was only trying to help me be better. Leaving wasn't easy. It took me years to unlearn the idea that love should feel like control. Now, I know real love encourages you to grow. It doesn't shrink you down to something manageable. Story 12. I learned that loving someone doesn't mean they'll love you the same way. We spent 6 years together, and in my mind, we were forever. I was loyal, patient, and always there for him, even when he wasn't there for me. I thought that was enough. I thought my love would eventually make him see me the way I saw him. But some people don't reciprocate the love they receive. They just take it. He never cheated, never yelled, never did anything obviously wrong. He just never really showed up for me, emotionally or mentally. I was always the one checking in, the one making plans, the one trying to keep the spark alive. And when I finally asked him if he even wanted this relationship, his answer was so simple, so casual. "I mean, it's fine. I don't really think about it much." That was when it hit me. He had never truly loved me, not the way I loved him. He just liked having me around because it was convenient. And I let it happen for 6 whole years. The lesson? If someone isn't excited to love you, stop giving them the privilege of your love. Story 13. Some people only love you when it's easy. For 5 years, we were happy, or at least I thought we were. We laughed, we traveled, we talked about the future. But then life got hard. My mom got sick. I started struggling with anxiety. I wasn't as fun or energetic as I used to be. I needed support. And suddenly, he wasn't there anymore. His texts became short. His affection disappeared. He started spending more time away from home, making excuses to avoid me. When I finally confronted him, he admitted it. I just don't like being around you when you're like this. It's too much. I was heartbroken. I thought love meant standing by each other, through the good and the bad. But for him, love was only worth it when things were fun and effortless. The moment it required patience, commitment, and emotional labor, he walked away. The hard truth? Some people aren't built for real love. They just want the idea of love, without any of the work that comes with it. Story 14. I learned that some people only stay until they find something better. We were together for 7 years. Built a life, planned a future, made sacrifices for each other. I truly believed we were solid. Then, out of nowhere, he ended things. Said he needed to find himself. That he just wasn't sure what he wanted anymore. I was devastated. Spent months blaming myself, wondering if I had done something wrong, if I could have fixed it. Then I found out he was engaged 3 months after our breakup. To a woman he had apparently met while we were still together. Turns out, he hadn't left to find himself. He had left because he had already found someone else. He just needed me to be his safety net until she was ready to take my place. That was when I learned one of the hardest lessons. Some people don't break up with you because they're lost. They do it because they've already moved on. They just haven't told you yet. Story 15. Never settle for someone who makes you feel hard to love. I spent 8 years with a man who made me believe I was difficult. Anytime I expressed my feelings, he would sigh, roll his eyes, tell me I was too sensitive. If I got upset over something, he'd make me feel like I was crazy for caring. If I ever needed reassurance, he'd call me clingy. After years of this, I started questioning myself. Maybe I was too emotional. Maybe I was asking for too much. Maybe I should just be grateful for what I had. I became smaller and smaller, afraid to voice anything that might upset him. Then one day, I watched a friend in a healthy relationship. Her boyfriend listened to her, supported her, reassured her, and she wasn't afraid to ask for it. That was when I realized my problem wasn't that I was too much. My problem was that I had been with someone who gave me so little. The lesson? The right person will never make you feel like you're hard to love. They will love you in a way that makes you feel safe, not like you're a burden. Story 16. I learned that some people love the way you make them feel, not you. We were together for nearly a decade. From the outside, we seemed happy. But the truth was, I was the one doing all the emotional heavy lifting. I was his cheerleader, his support system, his personal therapist. Whenever he had a bad day, I was there to reassure him, lift his spirits, and remind him of his. But when I needed that same support, silence. At first, I convinced myself he just wasn't good at expressing emotions. But then I noticed something. He was perfectly capable of showing affection when he needed something. If he was sad, he wanted comfort. If he was stressed, he wanted attention. But if I needed those things, he'd pull away, dismiss me, or make me feel like I was too much. When I finally left, he begged me to stay. Not because he loved me, but because he loved the way I made him feel. That was when I realized I had spent years being an emotional crutch for someone who never truly saw me. The lesson? If someone only loves you when it's convenient for them, they don't actually love you. Story 17. Love doesn't mean anything without respect. I had to learn that the hard way. We were together for 6 years and I truly believed he loved. He said all the right things, did all the grand romantic gestures, promised me forever. But the problem was he didn't respect, and without respect, love is just words. He would dismiss my opinions, make fun of my insecurities, and jokingly put me down in front of his friends. If I ever told him how it made me feel, he'd laugh and say I was being too sensitive. He'd do things I clearly told him I wasn't comfortable with, then act like I was controlling if I got upset. For years, I told myself it was normal, that all couples had their issues, that love meant sticking it out. But looking back, I wasn't in a loving relationship. I was in a constant battle to be treated like I mattered. The hardest lesson? Love should never make you feel small. And if someone truly loves you, they won't make you beg for basic respect. Story 18. I learned that ignoring red flags doesn't make them disappear. From the very start, there were warning signs. The way he'd get jealous over the smallest things, how he'd go through my phone, how he needed to know where I was at all times. But I told myself it was just because he cared so. Then came the mood swings. One day, he was the sweetest man on earth, showering me with love and affection. The next, he was cold and distant, acting like I had done something wrong without ever telling me what it was. I lived in a constant state of anxiety, trying to keep the peace, trying not to trigger one of his bad moods. By the time I realized how toxic it was, I was already in too deep. He had isolated me from friends, made me doubt my own instincts, convinced me that I was the problem. When I finally left, I saw things clearly for the first time. The red flags had been there all along. I just chose to look away because I wanted so badly for the love to be real. The lesson? If you have to constantly make excuses for someone's behavior, they aren't the right person. Story 19. I thought I was building a future with him. Turns out, I was just a placeholder. We were together for almost 7 years. We had talked about marriage, kids, growing old together. I made sacrifices for our relationship, turned down job opportunities, moved to a new city, adjusted my life to fit his. Then one day, he told me he wasn't ready for that kind of commitment, said he needed more time to figure things out. I was heartbroken but respected his honesty. 3 months later, he was engaged to someone else. It felt like a slap in the face. Not just because he moved on so quickly, but because it made me realize he was ready for commitment, just not with me. I had been the practice run, the person he stayed with until he found the one he actually wanted. The bitter truth? Some people won't settle down until they meet the right person. And sometimes, you're just the person they date before that happens. Story 20. I learned that you should never lose yourself in the process of loving someone else. I was a completely different person when we first met. I was independent, confident, full of life. But slowly, without even realizing it, I started changing. Not because I wanted to, but because I felt like I had to in order to keep him happy. He didn't like how outspoken I was, so I started keeping my thoughts to myself. He didn't like how much time I spent with my friends, so I saw them less and less. He wanted me to be more chill, so I stopped expressing my emotions, stopped asking for things, stopped expecting anything. By the time he left, I had nothing left of the person I used to be. And the worst part? He moved on without a second thought while I was left trying to figure out who I was without it. The painful lesson? Love should never cost you your identity. If you have to erase yourself to make someone else happy, it's not love, it's self-destruction. Story 21. I learned that some people just like being in a relationship. They don't actually like you. We were together for 7 years, and for a long time I thought we were perfect. We had routines, inside jokes, a shared history. It felt comfortable. But the truth is, I was confusing comfort with love. Looking back, I can't remember a time he ever truly chose me. He never put in effort, never made me feel special, never did anything beyond the bare minimum. And when I'd bring it up, he'd act confused. But we're together, aren't we? What more do you want? Turns out he wasn't with me because he loved. He was with me because I was convenient, because I was always there, because breaking up meant being alone, and he didn't want that. When I finally left, he moved on within weeks, like I had been nothing more than a placeholder. And that's when I learned, some people don't fear losing. They just fear losing the stability you provide. Story 22. I thought that if someone loved me, they would never hurt me. I was wrong. Our relationship started like something out of a movie. Grand gestures, late-night talks, promises of forever. But over time, the person I fell in love with disappeared. The compliments turned into criticism. The passion turned into control. The love turned into something I didn't even recognize. Every time he hurt me, whether it was with his words, his silence, or his actions, he would apologize. He'd swear he didn't mean it, that he was just stressed, that it wouldn't happen again. And every single time I forgave him, because I thought love meant forgiveness, that if I just loved him enough, he would change, that if I could be better, he wouldn't feel the need to hurt me anymore. But love should never be something you have to earn, and it definitely shouldn't be something that leaves you questioning your own worth. The hardest lesson? Just because someone loves you doesn't mean they won't hurt you. And just because you love them doesn't mean you have to stay. Story 23. I learned that emotional neglect is just as damaging as emotional abuse. For almost a decade, I was in a relationship where I felt completely alone. He wasn't a bad person. He never yelled, never cheated, never did anything obviously toxic. But he also never made me feel seen. I could be crying right in front of him, and he wouldn't ask what was wrong. I could go days without affection, and he wouldn't even notice. I could tell him I needed more, and he'd just shrug and say, "I don't know what you want me to do." And the worst part? I started convincing myself that I was asking for too much, that maybe this was just what long-term relationships felt like. That love wasn't supposed to be exciting or passionate or even deeply connected. It was just supposed to exist. It took leaving to realize that I had been starving for basic emotional needs. That love isn't just about being together, it's about showing up for each other. And if someone makes you feel like you're screaming into a void every time you express your feelings, that's not a relationship. That's loneliness in disguise. Story 24. I learned that a person can love you and still choose themselves over you every time. For 6 years, I put him first. His needs, his dreams, his comfort, I made them all a priority. And at first, I didn't mind. I wanted to support. That's what love is, right? But then I started noticing a pattern. Every time I needed him to be there for me, he had an excuse. If I was struggling, he was too busy. If I needed support, he'd tell me he was dealing with his own stuff. If I was going through a rough time, he'd make it about how my emotions were exhausting. And yet, when he needed something, I was always expected to drop everything. I finally realized that he wasn't a bad person. He just wasn't willing to put me first, not even once. And love isn't about keeping score, but it is about balance. If you're always the one bending, breaking, and sacrificing while the other person stays comfortable, that's not a partnership. The bitter truth? Some people will take everything you give without ever offering anything in return. And if you don't walk away, they'll keep taking until there's nothing left of you. Story 25. I thought love meant holding on. But sometimes, love means letting go. I stayed in a relationship for 9 years because I wanted it to work. Because I believed in the life we had built, the memories we had shared, the future we had planned. I thought that if I just kept trying, kept loving, kept compromising, kept forgiving, it would eventually click again. But no matter how hard I tried, we were different people. The things that once connected us had faded. The laughter was gone. The affection was forced. We weren't even fighting any. We were just existing side by side, both too afraid to admit the truth. The truth was we weren't in love any, and maybe we hadn't been for a long time. Leaving wasn't easy. It felt like mourning a death. But staying would have been worse, because love should never feel like a cage, like an obligation, like something you have to force to survive. The hardest lesson I ever learned? Love isn't always about holding on. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for both of you is to let go.